Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. If you have any questions or comments during the show about any of the topics I'm going to be covering, feel free to drop them in the live chat. I have it pulled up on my phone here, so I can kind of keep an eye on it. So hopefully maybe we can get kind of a conversation started. If you haven't already, please like this live stream. It really, really helps with people finding the channel, with engagement and algorithm. And if you have found us by surprise, we're on your YouTube homepage, your For You, subscribe if you haven't already, because we're trying to grow this community, trying to, increase the Cinema Mancuso family. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes down below in the description, so you can kind of jump around at your leisure. We stream this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And same deal as before, if you haven't already, please like this video. Like I said, it really helps. And do not forget to subscribe. Okay. Let me just make sure this is working here. Okay. So let's take a look at the box office from this past week. A total domestic box office for the week was a little under 123 million, which is about a 36% drop. So we saw a big drop last week because the week before that, we had a big, obviously a huge surge because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So last week made sense we would see a drop. This drop is not devastating, but it's not great. This is very much like the kind of right into the lead up of I guess like this Friday, which is probably the biggest release date of December, which has been over like the past maybe decade, really starting with like the Disney Star Wars films. I'm kind of staking late December as kind of almost like a semi-blockbuster period. And we'll talk about what's coming out this weekend. But so I guess this might account for the slight drop. But again, also it makes sense considering the movies that have done really well over the past couple of weeks did really, really well. So it's like, there's not as much money to go around anymore, right? The big new movie opening this week, and big, I'm gonna put a big quotes around big, Kraven the Hunter, coming in at 4th place, only made about 11 million for the weekend, despite projections of around 20 to 28 with a target of 23. Couldn't even make the bottom projections, and nearly half, only half of those projections. I really don't understand what Sony was thinking with this or any of these movies. So again, for context, Sony owns the film rights to Spider-Man. They've had the rights since the 90s. The MCU and Disney and Marvel have done a good job of trying to basically get all the film rights back to its characters that they sold off in the 90s. But Sony's the big holdout, which makes sense because Spider-Man is like the crown jewel in a lot of ways. At least in terms of the popularity of the character. They were eventually worked out a deal so they would allow Spider-Man to be in the MCU, and they would kind of, and his own solo MCU films would be like joint productions. But they were like, well, we want to make our own non-Disney, non-MCU Spider-Man movies, but we can't do that with Spider-Man, I suppose. Actually, I recently read a report that apparently they could. They just thought audiences would be confused if Tom Holland's Spider-Man showed up in another movie that wasn't MCU related, which makes sense. But then it begs the question, well, why don't you just cast someone new as Spider-Man? Because what they did makes no sense. So they decided we're going to create a MCU-like shared universe, but only for the Spider-Man villains. Now, this makes sense in the sense that Spider-Man, I would say Spider-Man and Batman have like the best roster of villains, just in terms of quantity and quality, and variety and diversity. But it's I don't even know how to describe it, because I want to use an analogy, but I don't even know if it's completely accurate. But I'll just say it, and then maybe I'll figure something out better. It's like a topic, or it's like a sauce, like. The Chick-fil-A sauce is really good on your chicken. But your mileage is going to vary if you're just eating the sauce, right? Like, what makes the Spider-Man villains interesting is not just because they're interesting characters and characterizations, but it's how they contrast with Spider-Man. And they often serve as foils for Spider-Man's character traits. Sometimes even being like the warped version of what he could have become or what he could still become, right? All of these movies in this Sony universe, the Venom movie, Morbius, Madam Web, and now Kraven the Hunter, they're trying to take these villains and make Spider-Man-less movies with them, which bothers me the most with Venom, because the whole reason why Venom looks like that is because he originally started as the symbiote for Spider-Man and bases his look off the Spider-Man costume. But what they do is that they're not villain films, they're essentially anti-hero stories, but they're heroes, right? They are the main characters of these stories. There's no real critical look at these characters. It's not like Joker, where Joker, you're not meant to, well, maybe you are, but, like, theoretically, when you watch Todd Phillips' Joker, which I also don't think is a very good movie, you're at least, like, meant to have some distance from it and understand that this is, like, a bad thing that's happening, right? As far, I've seen the first two Venom films. I haven't seen any of the others in this thing. And it seems like, again, no one else really did. That all of these movies, save for Venom, have done poorly. Morbius famously did really poorly. Madam Web, earlier this year, even did poorly. And now Kraven is part of that group, right? So not only did it fall below projections, but it has a long way to go before making back its budget. And I don't even know if it will, right? It was made for $120 million. It's only made $26 million. And as you know, second weekends, and third weeks, fourth weeks, it's going to keep dropping. So I do not foresee this ever getting anywhere close to $120 million. And that's just to break even, right? Or not even to break even, but ideally you want to double the budget to account for all the marketing costs. So I really don't understand what Sony was thinking with all this. So hopefully this is like the final, the final nail in the coffin. Like, just put this to rest. Either make Spider-Man movies parallel to the MCU or don't, right? Or sell it for $10 billion or whatever to Disney and Marvel. Because at this point, you're just embarrassing yourself. Also opening this week, we had the Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim. I don't know anything about this in the sense, like, I guess it's based off of a famous event in the Lord of the Rings universe, the War of the Rohirrim. I could be mispronouncing this. I really don't know. Only opened at 7th. And like Kraven the Hunter, though not as badly, fell below even the lowest projections. It was projected to make around 5 to 13 with a 10 million target. Only made about 4.5. So it just barely fell out of it, but still 5 was like the lowest that anyone that I saw was even saying. This brings its worldwide total to around 10 million, and it's not in as bad of a position as Kraven the Hunter, but it's still not very good, because it was made for about $30 million, so this is still very much in the red. Now, it's cool that this is even in theaters, right? That you have, like, an anime-inspired, animated Lord of the Rings film, spin-off, prequel thing, being released in theaters in a very particular and busy time of the year at the box office. So I gotta give, I guess I have to kind of maybe temper my expectations or temper my criticism in that this could have easily been just like a straight to, HBO Max film that would have gotten decent reviews. But so far, look at this, it seems like the reviews have been, it's good, right? So I guess it's like the fact that it's even in theaters, any money it makes is just going to be a plus on what it'll make once it's on digital and once it's on streaming, right? So not great openings for this week, and that probably factors into why we saw a drop like this. Though again, it's because Hollywood basically blew its load for Thanksgiving and right before Thanksgiving and this upcoming Friday. And then Christmas Day is usually, and then everything else is kind of like this little valley where things kind of just get thrown in. The fact Kraven the Hunter, because all of these I think Madam Web and Morbius both opened like in like the early part of their respective years. And because that's usually where you drop movies that you don't think are going to do very well. So the fact that this opened in December is weird, but also remember that Craven had been pushed back like a million times. So maybe they were just like, let's just release it. Let's just get it over with, and be done with it. Looking still here, we have a couple things continuing this week into their second week. We have the Interstellar re-release, right? So this, I don't know if it's in like a bunch of theaters, but I know for sure it's basically been doing like an IMAX 70mm rerun. And it actually went up a place in the weekly rankings here. Jumped from 6th to 5th place. Made about $7.5 million. So that was like a 63% jump. These numbers I have here are is the film's total domestic or worldwide, like, ever, not just for this re-release. So obviously this has already made like, $750 million. So it already has like a pretty good percent return. So again, any extra money, this is all for its 10th anniversary, right? Because it came out in 2014. I really wish I could have gone to see this because I never saw this in theaters when it came out. But the re-release, I mean, if you know anything about trying to see Oppenheimer in IMAX 70mm, it was so hard to get tickets, or at least good tickets at a good time with good seats. So I was just like, by the time I found out this was even happening, the tickets were already, so I was like, okay, I've seen the movie before. It'd be really cool to see, especially because it's, from what I understand, because I've seen the movie, obviously. It's so spectacle-y that it would have been really cool to see that. And people have been posting pictures of again, that IMAX 70mm, that almost vertical aspect ratio. People are just eating it up. And so hopefully studios look at this box office results and go, people not only like when we re-release really good movies, but they like these more quality premium formats. As opposed to just like, because the issue with movie theaters is not that people don't want to go to the movies. They want to feel like they're spending their money in a worthwhile way. But it's just completely, it's just an awful experience to go to most movie theaters. It's getting better, right? Like the big thing people love now is like the reclining cushiony seats. Because I think the theaters figured, you know what, before we need to have as many small little cheap seats to fit as many people as possible. Now, attendance is lower. Let's make the experience a little bit better for the people who are coming, right? But that doesn't usually fix the sound quality issues, the visual quality issues. Like, it's just not really a great experience, on average, right? So hopefully studios look at this and go, maybe we should, and especially with the success of Oppenheimer, also by Christopher Nolan from last year. Hopefully studios look and go, we should make more, not just like taking a movie and just blowing it up on IMAX, but like having something like specially designed for IMAX 70mm, right? Also continuing their second week, we have the Bollywood film Pushpa the Rule Part 2. Only made about $1.6 million for the weekend. Huge drop though, like 67%. So far it's made about $13 million domestically, but it's already made like 150 something million worldwide. Again, this having a big drop isn't really the big deal, frankly. Not because we shouldn't care about Bollywood films, but ultimately this isn't its primary market. It is done very well where it needs to do very well. Same kind of thing, or maybe not the same exact thing, but it's not as big. It's not really a big deal. We also have in its second weekend for King and Country, a Drummer Boy Christmas Live, dropping from 7th to 10th place. Only brought in $1.2 million. This is like a concert film for the Christian band for King and Country. Also had a pretty big drop, was at 57%. It's only made about $4 million worldwide, but again, this is something that's more of like concert films like this aren't always really, they're not really designed to make a huge profit. They're really more as like a piece of a larger media strategy for a band like this. Still in the top 5, still in its number 1 spot, holding on to that spot in its third week. We have Moana 2. Brought in about $38 million, which about a 48% drop. So this is just huge drop. I mean, this is not a huge drop, but considering where it was in its first weekend or first week, is interesting. So the first week it made like over, what was that domestic opening, like $139-ish million. and then it was like cut by like 60%, and then this is also a huge drop. So because if you notice there, number 2 is not that low, right? So we still have Wicked in number 2 in its 4th week, bringing just about 37, so only about a 1 million difference. It looks like Wicked is falling slower, more slowly than Moana is. Right now Wicked has a larger domestic total, though Moana is blowing it out of the water worldwide. Moana is at around 717 million. Wicked is around 525 million, which makes sense because animation's always going to do a lot better overseas, just because it's just more visual or visually appealing. Interestingly, they had the same budget, right? Both around 150 million. But as you can see with Wicked has much better legs, right? It has really kind of sustained itself week to week. So my bold prediction is Wicked is, I don't know. Longtime viewers of the show know I'm not always great with predictions, but my gut is telling me that next week Wicked is going to be above Moana 2, because I think the audience for Moana 2 is going to go see the new Sonic and the Mufasa prequel movie, whereas Wicked still has like its own little niche. Though Mufasa might pull away from that niche a little bit because they're both on paper prestige musicals, right? But from what it seems like, the Mufasa movie isn't anywhere half as good as Wicked is, so I don't know how much it's going to pull away from that. Also, still number 3. Again, we basically have had the same top 3 for like 3 weeks. Gladiator 2 in its 4th week brought in just a little under 13 million. Also, again, not a great drop, but not awful, 40%. But again, this has really done well overseas. It's made almost $400 million overseas, which is more than half of its total box office. Though the issue, though, is the name of the game is also, okay, it's made a lot of money, but how much did it cost? It cost like $230 million. So it's crossed that initial threshold of meeting the budget, but ideally, like we said, you want to double it. So, but seeing as it's still at 3, I think it still has a chance to, squeeze a little bit more out of it. This is not over for Gladiator 2 by any stretch. Also still in the top 10 in its 5th week, interestingly, Red 1. So, only brought in about 6.7 million. This one has been holding okay. If you look at the domestic multiple, it's, about 2/3 of its box office has been made outside of the opening, which is, pretty decent, I would say. And it's made like 175 million worldwide. And I think I read a stat today that it's still in theaters, but it like finally released on Amazon Prime because it was made by MGM, I believe, and MGM is owned by Amazon. It's done really, really well on Amazon, which it begs the question, why did they release it in theaters? And I think the answer is a lot of studios in the streaming era have gone, okay, streaming is not super viable as a business strategy, as a source of cash flow. The benefit of theatrical is that it's very one-to-one. If you get someone to watch it, that's money in your pocket. Whereas with streaming, the goal is subscribers, not views, right? In a perfect world, people subscribe and never use your service, right? Because then you have less traffic, which means you have less, cost to maintain the service, right? So I think a lot of studios realize with this, they go, well, you know what? This is good. This is a streaming movie anyway. So let's just put it in theaters. Let's make as much money as we can, and then we'll blow it up on streaming. So I think that, and that's what I've been saying, right? Is that this feels like a streaming movie. And right now, in terms of the theatrical box office, it's still in the red. I am sure that this is going to make back its money when it comes to that streaming market. Also still in the top 10, interestingly, a similar kind of idea, I think, though has been much more financially successful in terms of the ROI, is The Best Christmas Pageant. Holding its 8th place spot in its 6th week. Well, I was not expecting this. Only made about 2.1 million this week, but look at the percent drop, only 15%. Again, this definitely helps that it's a Christmas film, and we are very much, people always talk about, when does the Christmas season really start? December 17th is there's no debate. We are in the Christmas season. This has made 37 million domestically. look at that domestic multiple. It has had very, very strong legs over these past 6 weeks. And it's made about, most of that is domestic, like 99% or whatever. But it was only made for like $10 million. So again, not as much money as something like Gladiator 2 or Red One. But for the money that they put into it, this is very, very, very... It's just good to see smaller movies having good ROIs, because then hopefully studios maybe take a look at this and go, okay, instead of making one $200 million movie, let's make 10 $20 million movies. In that way, you just have more movies, and you just have more different kinds of movies, and then one could really blow up and do the blockbuster numbers, even though it was really small. Like, don't forget, Get Out was only made for like $4 million, and it made, I can't remember anymore, it astronomically more, like to the point where it wasn't even useful to do like a percent return, because it was like 1,000% return or something crazy like that. Okay, and looking ahead, I kind of spoiled it earlier. We have Sonic the Hedgehog 3. This is going to be interesting since the other two Sonic movies were hampered somewhat by the pandemic. The original film came out right before the pandemic. And the second film came out like right at the tail end of like the real period of lockdowns. The original film opened around 58 million, and then its sequel opened to about 72. So they're hopeful here, right? So it's projected to make around 65 to 89 million. I'm targeting it at around 78 million. The movies are fine. The first two are okay. They're not bad, but they're certainly not very good. I have no affinity for the Sonic brand. It was never really my thing as a kid. Despite efforts, like I would sometimes rent one of the games, and it just never really worked for me. I was never really super into it. But people seem really hyped about this one, especially since it's including Shadow the Hedgehog, pictured here, voiced by Keanu Reeves of all people. So my anticipation, it's going to be another mediocre, or just acceptable, serviceable family film. But I'm sure Paramount's hoping that it brings in the cheddar, if you will. And then we also have Mufasa the Lion King, the prequel origin story for the King of the Pride Lands, Mufasa. It's essentially a prequel to the 2019 live-action adaptation of Lion King. And I put that in quotes because, of course, it's not live-action. It's all animation, but it was part of that era of Disney live-action films. And since it's so photorealistic, it's just easier to say the live-action Lion King movie. Again, the review embargo just lifted today. The reviews seem, like it's fine. I saw some people saying, like, it's so much better than it could have been, or should have been, because Barry Jenkins directed it. But a lot of other reviewers were like, this is like a waste of Barry Jenkins' talent, essentially. So it's projected to make around 45 to 65 million. I'm going to put it around 54. If you can kind of clear that, I would say I would be impressed. So it'll be a matter of what audience is it pulling away? Is it pulling Moana people, or is it pulling Wicked people, or is it pulling neither of those? But that remains, we still have yet to see. And then also we have this movie Homestead, really, really small movie, only projected to make about 3 to 6 million. I'm targeting it around 4. It's kind of just like an indie, Wikipedia is calling it a post-apocalyptic drama film. I'm not expecting much from this, and again, the box office numbers reflect that. Though looking at this week, the number 10 only made about 1.2, so, if this makes 3, and unless Sonic and Mufasa really suck out all the oxygen, this could very well just barely squeak into the top 10. All right, let me grab a quick drink. Speaking of Disney live-action remakes. Oh. Don't you hate when water is, like, so cold? It, like, hurts your teeth. Okay. So let's talk about story number 1. So Tangled, the, semi-iconic Disney film, I wouldn't call it iconic, is going to be getting a live-action remake. Surprise, surprise. So it's reportedly going to be directed by Michael Gracie, who has only directed 2 films. An upcoming film called Better Man about Robbie Williams. I think it's Disney, right? But it's like the gimmick is like it's like a CGI. Like he's basically doing like Planet of the Apes style motion capture because the whole he's like I always felt like I was different. So the whole story is like basically a biopic about him, but he's like a monkey. But the most famous movie that Michael Gracie directed was The Greatest Showman, right? Very kind of mediocre musical film, but a huge box office success in terms of just the word of mouth. It just had these legs where it was just in the top 10 for like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And sometimes we even have jumps, right? So Disney is looking to tap him to direct this. And then the most recent draft of the script was reportedly written by Jennifer Caton Robinson, who has written a bunch of stuff, but most notably co-wrote Thor: Love and Thunder with Taika Waititi, which is not a great sign since that was like one of the more mediocre MC movies that like we've ever gotten. But that seems to be where it's at, but it's nothing is confirmed right now. So a little bit context on the original Tangled film. If you're watching this, you're too old to have really known about Tangled, or you're too young to have really known about Tangled. So this was released in 2010. This was Disney Animation Studios' 50th feature, because of course they had all these other little spin-off studios that would make like direct-to-video stuff or something like a Goofy movie wasn't made by like the main Disney Animation Studio. That was made by like a separate, I think it was called Disney Toon Studios. And of course Pixar's its whole other company. This was the 50th feature from Disney Animation, and arguably, though I don't know who would argue against this, it's arguably like the first beautiful CG animated film from the studio, because they had done a couple before this, notably Dinosaur, Chicken Little, Meet the Robinsons, Bolt. Then they went back to 2D for very, very briefly with Princess of the Frog, and then starting with this one, with Tangled, they haven't made a 2D. This particular branch of Disney has not made a traditionally animated film since, right? So this isn't the first CG film that they've made, but it's the first of like this new streak of theirs. But it's also the first beautiful one, because Chicken Little was very, very rough in terms of like the animation. And Meet the Robinsons, Bolt, these were not considered these visual pleasures that you would watch. Chicken Little is almost like disgusting looking, right? Even though I have a soft spot for it because I grew up with Chicken Little. But again, the release of Tangled was really part of that Disney recovery, right? Because of course, they had the big boom in the 90s with, Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid and of course The Lion King. It's what's often called the Disney Renaissance. And then that kind of started to kind of fizzle out in like the mid-90s, and then really fizzled out by once you get into the 21st century. They really are getting their asses handed to them by Pixar. Disney at this point is only distributing Pixar's movies. They don't own Pixar. They would then later buy Pixar under Bob Iger in 2006. And John Lasseter, who we now know is like a kind of a creepy, not great boss to work for if you're a woman guy, he ends up, for all those faults, that being said, he was a really great filmmaker and creative kind of manager. So he ends up becoming like the head of Disney Animation as part of this buyout. So you start to see this trend of the film starting to get a little bit better, right? And, that's how you get Princess and the Frog and Tangled and eventually Frozen, right? Like Frozen is kind of like the crowning achievement, but Tangled, this is like right before, right? This was pretty successful, and it made nearly $600 million at the box office, which was not crazy, but again, for Disney at that point, that was a really big success for them. And it was, to be fair, it's also, don't forget, this is 14 years ago, so with inflation, it's a lot higher. So like for 2010, it was the 8th highest grossing film worldwide. So just to give you a sense of, what the competition was doing. And it was well received, right? It has an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the critical consensus on the website says, quote, "While far from Disney's greatest film, Tangled is a visually stunning, thoroughly entertaining addition to the studio's classic animated canon," end quote. And again, like I was saying, it kind of got dwarfed by Frozen a few years later, which came out in 2013, right? It was popular, and it still is to an extent. But what's hurt it the most is there's not really a bunch of there's like no iconic songs. There are some good songs, and songs that Disney fans like and fans of movies like this like, but nothing that like the general public knows. Whereas everyone knows "Let It Go." Everyone knows "Do You Want to Build a Snowman," right? Like it doesn't have any songs like that. That being said, though, unlike Frozen, which did get a sequel eventually, and had kind of a bunch of little shorts, Tangled has actually had a really strong post-film life. So they did make a little sequel short called Tangled Ever After. But then the big continuation was this television series that they did. It was 2D animated. It wasn't in the style of the movie. It was called Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure. And I remember watching the TV movie that essentially serves as the pilot, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And it went on for like 3 or 4 seasons. So it really has had a little bit of a life beyond itself. But at the same time, it is odd that this movie that's only 14 years old is getting a live action remake, right? And this is really why I wanted to talk about this story, because we really don't know anything about this remake except for what I've already told you, that it looks like the director of The Greatest Showman is going to direct it, and then that writer who co-wrote Thor: Love and Thunder is going to be writing it. We literally know nothing else. But why I want to talk about this story is that it just reflects Disney's obsession with making live-action remakes of their animated film. So I went and I crunched the numbers. So they have released, to date, up to Moana 2, Disney Animation Studios, their primary animation division, has released 63 animated features, going all the way back to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. Of those 63, a third have either had live-action remakes made, or some kind of live-action adjacent project. So, like, I counted Maleficent and Cruella. Or they have a live-action remake that is going to be coming out soon. Or there has been a live-action remake announced for this, right? So I did fudge the numbers a little bit, include things that haven't actually happened yet. But that's a third. 21 out of 63 movies have been transformed. That's a lot. That's really is a lot, especially when you're the studio that essentially revolutionized and institutionalized feature animation. For you to then, as the studio, devalue the medium by saying, "Oh, we're gonna remake this," and in all of the movies, like, this is just a huge, complete cash grab. Now, to be fair, those 21 movies, and a little like trivia fact, Jungle Book has actually gotten 2 live-action remakes from Disney. There have been a bunch just from other studios, but Disney made one in the 90s, and then they made one in 2016. But all these different movies, the quality varies, right? Sometimes they're good. Like, I actually thought Cruella was quite good. But then you have on the other end, just they're just soulless. I haven't seen it. The live action Lion King movie is, from what I understand, almost a shot-for-shot remake of the original 1994 animated film. If not shot-for-shot, then like line for line. Like, it's basically adapting almost every single part of that original movie. And it just reveals a creative bankruptcy at Disney right now, which I've talked about a lot on my channel over the past year. That the studio just clearly is I don't want to say, oh, they're more focused on money than the art, because they've always been, right? These are corporations, not since maybe the Walt Disney era did they put art over the money, right? The art is a means to make money. They have no other larger philosophical or artistic positions or ambitions, right? And the strategy has been successful, right? Because these live-action remakes make a lot of money. For example, that live-action Lion King movie from 2019 is the 10th highest-grossing film of all time. Not of the year, not of Disney's movies, the 10th highest-grossing film of all time. That's insane. For a movie that mediocre to be that successful is insane. And again, you can make the argument, and I think there's some validity to this argument, though I think people making it aren't sincere. But you have the argument of, well, this is an opportunity to enhance the stories, to reinvent the stories, and bring them to a new generation. That's always the corporate speak for we are digging up an old franchise. We want to bring it to a new generation. That's all really interesting. The problem is that usually these films don't enhance or deepen or expand the original source material. And oftentimes, again, the selection of what to adapt is usually very cynical and calculated, right? It's really the big names, at least at first, right? Your Aladdins, your Beauty and the Beast, your Lion Kings, your Little Mermaids eventually, right? Though they've kind of already gone to the well on all the really, really A level, so now they're having to go to things like Tangled. And it's a shame because, on principle, I'm kind of against this because, again, it undervalues or undermines the validity of the medium. That, like, oh, that's for kids. This is going to be, like, the real movie. But even forgetting all of that, there were films in the Disney canon, if you will, that would benefit from, if not a live-action remake, at least just, like, another stab at it, right? Think of a film like, flawed, something like Atlantis, right? Kind of a flawed film. Like, it's good, but it has kind of some flaws. That would do wonders as a live-action film, but just getting to kind of have a do-over would be good, right? Or you take something like Treasure Planet, like one of my favorite Disney movies ever, that severely underperformed at the box office. That would be a really interesting, experiment to make a live-action remake, but you'll never get live-action remakes of those unless they completely run out of everything, which they eventually will. But you won't get those for a long time because the value in remaking them is the same reason why they wouldn't. The value would be to take a film that was kind of flawed and make something better, but they want to take something that was already good so they can cash in on the brand, right? They're not going to adapt something that no one cares about, even if it's it's the most meaning of a redo, right? But like I said, eventually they will just run out of stuff to adapt, right? So looking at the last 10 years, so 2015, everything released from 2015 to this year of 2024, they've released 9 new animated features. The most successful, both critically and commercially, I would say, have been Zootopia, Moana, the original Moana, and Encanto. Of course, Frozen 2 made bank. Looks like Moana 2 is going to make bank. But in terms of a real impact, a cultural impact, and just critics really liking it, I would say those 3, right? So you have 9 films, only 3 of which are really culturally significant, I would say. In the same period, Disney has released 14 live-action films based on one of their animated features, right? That's 14 compared to 9. So at that rate, eventually they're going to run out, right? They won't be able to replace the supply faster than they're using the supply, right? And it'll just become this snake eating its own tail, where everything just becomes an adaptation of an adaptation, a reference to a reference. And it eventually would just become kind of this empty thing, I do a podcast with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick film franchises and we watch all the movies in the franchise. And you can find the link to that in the description below. We recently did our episode on the entire Star Wars franchise. We went through each film over the season, and our final episode is going over the entire franchise and kind of looking at as a huge retrospective. And something I said in the episode that's going to be coming out not this Friday, but next Friday, the 27th, is that Disney, it's almost kind of become like creative fracking, right? Where when you're digging up oil and you're sucking up oil out of the ground, you have these oil fields. And at first they're like oil's literally bubbling out of the ground and you just suck it out, right? But eventually the oil runs dry. So you either have a few choices. You go to a new oil field, you give up on oil, maybe you use that land for something else, or you frack, right? Which is a lot more work to get a lot less oil, and it has a lot of awful environmental impacts, right? That's like what they're doing here, where it's like they've sucked up all the oil out of the oil field, so now they have to frack. That they're realizing that they can make a shit ton of money, the 10th highest grossing film of all time again, they can make all this money by this business strategy. And it's interesting that they're still going forward with this. IndieWire notes that the film division has a new executive kind of composition, right? So the former film chief at Disney, Sean Bailey, he's the one who really spearheaded this whole trend of these live action remakes. But now the position is held by Matthew Greenbaum, who's the former chief of Searchlight Pictures, formerly Fox Searchlight, and that was bought out by Disney. Currently, he holds the position, but now it seems like he's continuing the trend. So it looks like it's not just this one executive's vision, but rather it looks like it is a strategy that transcends who's holding the position, who's holding the cards. So again, I don't want movies to be bad. Like I want this movie to be good, but based off of what we've seen, I'm a little skeptical, and it doesn't help when the inception of the idea to do this is a cynical corporate decision rather than a true desire. Like, no one's going to Disney like, I have this great creative idea to remake Tangled. It's the executives decide it first, and then they hire the people, right? And typically that does not result in particularly interesting movies. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Oh no, I forgot the number. This is story number 2. So let's talk about story number 2. So Taylor Swift's world concert tour, the Eras Tour, has finally ended its historic run. This was a mammothly long concert tour. It started in March 2023 and just wrapped up now in December of 2024. It went on for 633 days, so almost 2 years. There was 149 shows, which amounted to over 520 collective hours of performing on Taylor Swift's part. All 149 of those shows sold out. Not only sold out, but packed. Like, basically these stadiums were finding any and every way to put in as much people as they could without breaking fire code laws, right? The concert entailed about 45 songs over the course of like 3.5 hours. It was in 51 cities across 21 countries. It had over 10 million people in attendance, 10 million tickets sold. That averages out to almost 70,000 people per show. But that was just the average, right? So the biggest night was back this year in February 2024 in Melbourne, Australia, with 96,000 people. Not only was that the biggest night of the tour, NPR notes that this is also the biggest concert of Swift's entire career. But then the big metric here that's getting all the headlines, as it should, is that it brought in over $2 billion, with a B, over $2 billion in ticket sales. This is the highest grossing concert tour of all time. The record was previously held by Coldplay with a show, I think it was actually last year or earlier this year. Like, it's not that long ago that they set this record. They did 156 shows, and they only made $1 billion. So Vanity Fair notes, but this is obvious if you just do the math, she doubled their record with slightly less shows. It was basically the same amount of shows, and she doubled it, right? And Variety notes that $2 billion is a lot of money. This only reflects the face value of these tickets, right? So notably, she did not employ dynamic pricing. So, like, basically the tickets cost what they cost, and then scalpers might raise the prices and resell them. Whereas now it's a thing on Ticketmaster where, like, Bruce Springsteen's talked about this, where he's like, look, people are going to end up, because scalpers exist, people are going to end up paying a lot of money for tickets. So we may as well make it so that the expensive tickets are going to, that money's going to us instead of these scalpers or these resellers, right? Who just buy up all the tickets really quick using like bots and hacking, or maybe not hacking, but you know what I mean. Notably, she did not do that, right? So each ticket was roughly $200. And the New York Times, this is still really expensive, even just at the face value. The New York Times notes that this is above the industry average, which is around $130 per ticket. But notably, so $200 a ticket, if you factor in the actual ticket prices that people paid, it was like $1,600 per ticket with the scalping. So, and I shouldn't use the word scalping. Some of this was legal reselling, right? But in any case, there's this huge markup. So in actuality, the amount of money that people spent on this, well, let's see, 1,600 times 10 million. Let's see, I don't even know. There's too many zeros. There's no commas. 16 billion. Yeah. So this theoretically, she made $2 billion. Well, not her personally, but like the tour made $2 billion. People spent $16 billion. That's more money than like the last 3 years of the American box office combined. I would guess. I don't have those numbers in front of me. The American box office terms of movies. And then on top of that, that's not enough. NPR notes that figure, $2 billion, doesn't include profits made from secondary things. So like merchandise sold at the concerts or just online. Of course, there was the very successful concert film that came out last summer during the strikes. It made like $100 million, which is like the highest grossing concert film ever. Recently, I think Target put out like a coffee table book with pictures and notes about the concert. This has just made so much money. And I have a quote here from this last performance that she did a couple days ago. She said, quote, this is on stage. She said, quote, "I want to thank every single one of you for being part of the most thrilling chapter of my entire life to date. Making friends and bringing joy to each other, that is, I think, the lasting legacy of this tour, is the fact that you have created such a space of joy and togetherness and love. You're why this is so special. And you supporting me for as long as you have is why I get to take these lovely walks down memory lane every single night, because you cared about every era of my entire life that I've been making music. So thank you," end quote. Of course, she's referencing the whole concept of this tour is basically going through all the different eras of her career and kind of going through all the greatest hits on you know, because she's the biggest star on the planet. She's been the biggest star. Her fame and celebrity have kind of ebbed and flow. I feel like it was also really big when I was like in high school, like from 2012 to 2015. And then some of her other what was that album? Like Reputation was kind of got mixed reviews, at least for me. I don't know, maybe critics really liked it, but I thought it was kind of meh. Lover was a step in the right direction, but it wasn't like this earth-shattering thing. A lot of really great songs on it, though. But she's just the biggest star on the planet. And so she can support having a 3.5-hour show. You know, she's a prolific. Her first album was released in 2006, and since then she's had 11 studio albums, 4 re-recorded albums, because of course there's this whole thing about the music rights, so she didn't technically have the rights to the recordings, so she re-recorded all the music, so she got to re-release it all again, and also 4 live albums, and of course all this extra merchandise and films and all this stuff. And she's had so many huge hits, and I compiled a selected list, so including, but certainly not limited to, Teardrops on My Guitar, Love Story, You Belong With Me, We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, I Knew You Were Trouble, 22, All Too Well, which has become really, really popular, even though I don't think it was ever a single, Shake It Off, Blank Space, Style, Bad Blood, Out of the Woods, Look What You Made Me Do, Delicate, You Need to Calm Down, and Cruel Summer. And that is just the ice, that is just scratching the surface that is Taylor Swift's discography and success. And she's wildly popular. You know, I talked about this before on this channel. The Swifties as a group are one of, if not the most loyal fandom to ever exist. They will buy everything, they will listen to everything, and they will go see everything. They are loyal to a fault. So it's become a joke where it's like, if you piss off the Swifties, it's at your own peril. Famously for this concert, Ticketmaster kind of imploded when people were trying to buy tickets at the beginning of this tour. And so many people were upset. Congress was like, we might have to like look into this. Only Taylor Swift could inspire such legislative action like that, right? And the New York Times compares her popularity to that of the Beatles in the 60s and someone like Michael Jackson in the 80s, like in his prime. And I think those are really apt comparisons, right? So all of this to say, this makes sense that she's broken this record, right, of the most amount of money made from a concert tour ever. Again, she has this rabid fan base, and NPR even notes, I did not know this. This is insane. There was one of the performances in Seattle. Fans dancing in the stadium during the concert. They danced so hard, they caused a 2.3 magnitude earthquake. That's insane. That is like levels that the ancient mind couldn't have never have even wrapped their head around. And again, because she's been at this for so long and is so prolific, she has the catalog to support a nearly 4-hour epic concert, right? Usually the people who are doing like 3-hour concerts are these like old rock bands that have decades of material. Maybe not maybe 2 decades. Maybe it's decades by definition. But she's just produced so much content in that time period. And a lot of really great content. You know, your mileage varies with Taylor Swift depending on what you're listening to and who you are, but on the whole, she's also fairly unproblematic, right? For all intents and purposes. There's a little bit of white feminism there, this idea, like she's really outspoken about gender issues and women issues, but not as vocal about other issues. But you never get the sense that she doesn't care about those issues, that her heart's always in the right place. So it'd be great if she spoke up a little bit more, but she's not actively saying problematic stuff, right? And frankly, if anyone you watch the show, I'm very far left. I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist, but I'm pretty far left, especially when it comes to economic issues. So, there's billionaires legally should not exist. We should tax, everything above $1 million at 100% as part of our progressive tax system. That being said, she's about as ethical of a billionaire as you can get. Just in terms of the treatment of like the staff and the people around her. So it was reported after this, this record was confirmed to have been broken. It was later reported that she's handed out almost $200 million in bonuses to tour employees, which includes, and I have a huge list here that I pulled. This includes truck drivers, caterers, instrument techs, merch team, lighting, sound, production staff and assistants, carpenters, dancers, bands, security, choreographers, pyrotechnics, riggers, hair, makeup, wardrobe, physical therapists, and video team. Now, as a borderline communist, I would say, well, they produce so much of the labor, they should get a lot bigger share. But a billionaire handing out essentially like 10% of the profits as bonuses, or not profits, but just the revenue. That's really awesome. At the end of the day, like if we're gonna have these billionaires, that's the way to do it. So this has just been a mammoth success for Taylor Swift. And it's also really important for the concert ecosystem, because concerts and concert tickets are hugely important for music artists. Because this doesn't really apply to Taylor Swift, but most music artists don't make a lot of money, if anything, off of the music itself, because usually it's the record label that owns the royalties to that, right? So oftentimes where musical artists make most of their money is from touring and concerts, right? So this is super, super important as a industry to support musical artists who are not billionaires, but the people who are just like living in a small town, just trying to, make stuff, with passion, right? So the question is, will this inspire more interest in going to concerts? Or is this just a one-off? Is the thinking for people, rather than going to see 5 concerts in a year and the tickets cost $50, I'd rather save all my money and go to the 3.5-hour epic of the international sensation that has all this material and goodwill? That remains to be seen. But in any case, it also goes to show how valuable the performing arts are to local economies. As every single city talked about that had a Taylor Swift concert, part of this tour, their local economies saw a big boost. And I think it was in 2023 that, like her concert amounted to some crazy percent. It wasn't huge. It may have been less than 10%. But the one tour accounted for some percent of the entire, economy of the United States for 2023, or however you would factor that or describe that impact. Off of this one person and her music. And she's not that old. She's only like 35. Like, I'm 27. Like, she could have babysat me. Like this is not an old person in their prime. And it's interesting, she's doing this Eras tour where hopefully for her fans, there are still many, many more eras to come. So it's just a huge monumental feat. And even though it's a white woman, it's still really exciting to see this record being broken and held by a woman as opposed to an old boomer British rock band, who I love. I love old boomer British rock bands. Don't get me wrong. But this is really exciting and does speak to how far women have come in every industry, but especially in the music industry. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 3. So the National Labor Relations Board, or the NLRB, has issued a complaint against Kinetic Content, which is the production company for Love is Blind, the Netflix reality show, as well as the subsidiary of Kinetic Content, Delirium TV, that I guess works on Love is Blind. And the complaint from the NLRB, so this is like a federal agency, if you will. I mean, agency maybe is the wrong word, but the complaint is demanding that the producers, quote, reclassify all participants since January 19th, 2023 as employees and notify them in writing that they are employees, end quote. And their argument is essentially that the contestants were, quote unquote, deprived of their rights as workers. When I put those in quotes, I'm not doing that as like a sly, condescending thing, like, oh, like quote unquote deprived. It's just like the exact word that they use, that they were deprived of what was owed to them as workers. So if you've stumbled upon this video or you follow me on this channel, you're not into reality television, you're like, oh, I'm so above it all, and you have no idea what I'm talking about. So Love is Blind, very, very popular reality show. It's on Netflix. It premiered in 2020, like right before COVID. I think it was like February of 2020. And the premise of the show is that contestants in different cities, each season is like a different city, and typically they are very, very attractive, conventionally heterosexually attractive men and women, cis men and women. The premise is that these contestants are split up, men and women, and they essentially speed date with the opposite sex, but only through voice, right? They call them the pods. They go in the pods. So you basically go like almost a little room where you have like a little microphone and you're just like talking to each other. And you might think, oh, that's an interesting experiment on, human connection and how dating can work. Oh, no, it's not about dating. It's about marriage. The idea is that people will propose to each other in the pods without seeing each other. And then really most of the show it takes place after Will You Marry Me? Yes. So most of the entertainment comes from the post-engagement trials and tribulations of these two people who had never met in person, now not only getting married, but are getting married within like 4 weeks or something crazy. So the whole premise is, will they make it to the altar? And they will prove the experiment. Is love truly blind? Sidebar, this isn't really important for this particular topic we're covering. I just fundamentally reject the thesis of this show. Not to say that, oh no, love is not blind and looks are really important. Well, yes, that is actually really important. But love is more than physical attraction, but it's also more than just being able to hold a conversation, right? All the pods do is just create environments to talk to people. That's not how strong relationships are built. They're built on, there is something intangible about cohabitating, about just being in another person's presence. Like, I'm not super new age, like, man, all the energies, man. But like, there is like something about being within someone's aura or their energy, something inexplicable, unspeakable. So the whole premise of the show is like, oh, looks, but they also choose like the most beautiful people to be on the show. So if they really wanted to show Is Love Truly Blind, they would cast a bunch of hot people and a bunch of ugly people, and then theoretically they would all end up mismatching or mixing and matching. So I'm just like fundamentally against the premise of this anyway. But I don't watch it religiously. My fiance Viviana watches it, and I'll watch if I'm in the room as almost like a hate watch, as like a great like Brechtian distancing from the characters, if you will, right? But nevertheless, it's been hugely successful for Netflix. It's had 7 seasons. It's about to start its 8th season in February, 5 years after it premiered. And it's been, like I said, it's been very successful. Netflix reported 30 million households had watched the show within the first 4 weeks of the series premiere back in 2020. That, again, it was really helped by it premiering right before COVID, because when everyone was stuck inside looking for stuff to watch, they watched Tiger King and they watched Love is Blind. And on top of that, there have been multiple international versions, like Love is Blind Brazil or Love is Blind another place. I forget what the other ones are, but it is spread. It's been a very lucrative franchise for Netflix. But it is not without its share of controversy. So there have been many complaints made by the participants against Netflix and, I guess, kinetic content. Referring to long hours on the show. Famously, they're denied free access to food and water. By free, I don't mean monetarily free, but they can't just drink water. They are only given water when the producers decide to give them water, but there's always alcohol, right? And the producers do that because they want the contestants liquored up, tipsy, if not buzzed, if not drunk, with no food or water in their system, to produce the most entertaining content, right? It is not an accident, right? And on top of that, there's really unsafe working conditions. So there's been instances of physical and even sexual assaults or abuse, during the quote-unquote honeymoon periods of some of these relationships, that were then ignored by the producers because it didn't fit in their storyline. It didn't fit with their show. It would be a bad look for the brand. It would be a bad look for the experiment. So some of that was kind of kept under wraps. This all kind of came to a boiling point earlier this year, I think it was in January. This was a lawsuit against Delirium TV and Netflix. It was filed by season 5 participant Renee Posh? I'm not sure. Back in January, like I said, and it related to a multi-million-dollar arbitration action that the producers took against her in November of 2023, because they were claiming that she was talking about these conditions. And they claimed that she was violating her NDA, her non-disclosure agreement, by discussing those conditions of her experience on the show. I got a quote here from Brian Friedman, who's the lawyer for Renee Posh, saying, quote, "The practices identified by the NLRB and its complaint against Delirium are ubiquitous in this space. Make no mistake, the reality reckoning is alive and well. This is not the last shoe to drop. Stand by," end quote. And it really just... It really reflects a larger issue in the reality TV space. And maybe some people, especially if you don't like reality TV or you base your whole personality on being better than that, like, oh, that stuff's so stupid. Yeah, that's the point. It's supposed to be stupid. It's not trying to be high art by any stretch of the imagination. It appeals to our most base, desires for voyeurism. And to see people's lives implode on themselves, right? But it doesn't matter how lowbrow the art is. Reality TV personalities are workers. And in this country, for now, workers have rights. They perform labor, which produces surplus value for the business owners. That is the definition of a worker. Studios love reality shows because they're cheaper than scripted content. You don't have to pay the writers. You can get around paying the participants the wages you'd have to pay union actors. And they really blew up during the writer's strike. Not this past writer's strike, but the one before that in 2007, 2008. Because again, they could bypass needing writers in the first place. So not only did they not need writers, but even if they had access to the writers, it would have been more expensive to use them anyway. But they're performing labor and creating value for a business. those are workers, and workers have rights. And workers' rights and unions, because that's also been a big debate in the reality world, is trying to unionize and organize these participants to be under something like SAG or maybe even its own thing. And sometimes people instinctually go like, oh, come on. They don't need a union. Because we imagine unions as like we needed unions in the 1890s because people were dying at the factories and they needed to stand up. That's all true, but rights and unions aren't just for dangerous work. Workers as a group deserve the right to collectively bargain, to improve their conditions, to improve their wages. And, Love is Blind is not unique in these issues. So many reality shows, especially of late, like the past 10 years, have had similar kinds of scandals. I think Big Brother had a similar issue in terms of, the experience not being great for people, particularly women, particularly female participants. So this is something I really don't watch a lot of reality TV, but something I have very strong feelings about, that they deserve a larger cut of the pie, and they should be able to do this work without the stress, the unnecessary stress that the conditions bring. But those conditions exist because they end up making a lot of money for someone like Netflix. Okay, let me grab a quick drink. Okay. Let's talk about story number 4. So Warner Brothers Discovery has chosen not to renew its distribution deal of new episodes of Sesame Street on HBO and Max. So if you're not aware, new Sesame Street episodes air on HBO Max first and then go to PBS. And it's been that way for almost a decade now. I think it was like 2016 it started. Max put out a statement saying, quote, "It has been a wonderful creative experience working with everyone at Sesame Street on the iconic children's series, and we are thrilled to be able to keep some of the library series on Max in the US." So sidebar there, they're still licensing a lot of the content. They're just not going to be the place to see the new episodes necessarily. Let me continue with the quote. "As we've launched Max through and based on consumer usage and feedback, we've had to prioritize our focus on stories for adults and families, and so new episodes from Sesame Street at this time are not as core to our strategy," end quote. Similarly, Sesame Workshop, which is the company that produces Sesame Street, it's a nonprofit. They said, quote, "We are excited to extend our 10-year partnership with Warner Brothers Discovery, keeping Sesame Street's iconic library available on Max through 2027. We will continue to invest in our best-in-class programming and look forward to announcing our new distribution plans in the coming months, ensuring that Sesame Street reaches as many children as possible for generations to come," end quote. I feel like I'm about to beat a dead horse here. But if you don't know what Sesame Street is, right? So this is the iconic, cultural icon, educational children's television program that uses a mixture of live action, sketch comedy, animation, and of course, most famously, puppetry. It was notable at the time that it premiered in 1969 on PBS, the public broadcasting system or service. I forget which one it is. It used educational goals and a curriculum to shape its content. So it wasn't educational just in the fact like, we're going to teach them ABCs. Like, they structured their own development process like a teacher would, right? It has become a tad more commercial, right? To be fair, but it still has that at its core. It has not lost that focus by any means of working with educators and using the newest best practices on how to educate young children. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at, preschool age children, like maybe 3 to 5 or 6, maybe, right? And again, it was, especially in the late 60s, one of its main objectives was filling the gaps left in young children in the inner city. The gaps left by the inner city school systems. So anyone, it's funny because my sister just had a baby, so I'm an uncle. And my parents are grandparents now. My mom has always loved Sesame Street, so she's like watching it with the baby, whatever. And I don't even know how it comes up, but my mom will text me being like, "Your father called me a woke asshole because so-and-so," or something about Sesame Street. And I just never understood that criticism because Sesame Street was always woke. It never became woke. It, from the jump, was woke. It was catering to... It recognized the institutional and systemic racial problems in this country and sought to try to ameliorate those. So I've never understood people being like, oh, Sesame Street is so woke now. It's always been woke, which I don't see as like a bad thing. And again, like I say, it's become a cultural icon, primarily because of the Muppets. Of course, it was always popular because it was very educational. It was very nutritious, right? It was educational, but it was also very entertaining. If you watch those earlier seasons, like I took a history of children's television course at NYU, and we watched the entire first episode of Sesame Street that ever aired. And the reason why I say entire is that if you don't maybe you don't remember, because again, you probably stopped watching this when you were really young. The episodes are like not like the movies or like the spin-off VHS or whatever. The actual episodes of this TV show are like an hour long. And that's like a true hour, because I don't think there's many commercials on PBS. Like, there's not a lot of commercial breaks. So, we watched the entire thing. And remember how I listed all the different elements, like live action, sketch comedy, animation, puppetry? It was pretty evenly divided. The Muppets were not the primary focus. But again, because it's become a little more commercialized, it's focused a lot more on the Muppet characters because it's a lot more merchandisable. You can make a lot of money. Again, money for a good cause. It's money going back into the program. But it is more commercialized nonetheless. And again, it's especially with the, it made a lot of money in like the 80s, especially the 90s, and a little bit of the 2000s, with, again, direct to consumer content in the form of VHS tapes or DVDs or things like that. But of course, that as physical media sales have waned, Sesame Workshop has really, struggled a little bit, right? So, famously, like I said, in 2016, it's the program started releasing new episodes on HBO. So the newest episode of Sesame Street, if you wanted to watch it, you had to have HBO. It would still go on PBS, but 9 months later, which I got a lot of criticism for, understandably, because again, this program that was, designed, specifically, if not completely, but very much was a target to serve as inner city, let's be honest, inner city black children, now being put behind a paywall. It just really showed the contrast in the change over the course of 40 years or so, right? Or 50 years, right? 60, yeah, like almost 50 years. So why would Warner Brothers give this up if this is such a strong brand? Well, the Hollywood Reporter notes that Max, the streaming service, I don't know why, HBO, of the entire Warner Brothers portfolio, HBO is probably the strongest brand they have. Why did they take the HBO out of HBO Max? That makes no sense to me. Anyway, they know that Max is focusing more now on adult and family content. Like we heard in that quote from the Max spokesperson, that Sesame Street's just not in their core strategy right now. The Wrap notes that Max pulled 37 children's titles off of Max in 2022. And JB Perrette, who's the head of streaming and video games for Warner Brothers Discovery, recently spoke at a Wall Street conference saying, quote, "There are too many other offerings out there that are highly appealing and already have a user behavior fairly well established. That's one of the areas where we said that's not a priority investment category for us," end quotes. So their focus is more on adult content for adults and family content. So you might be going, wait, family, children, isn't that like the same thing? Not necessarily. In the most basic definition, family content would be something that is appealing to all ages. So maybe think like a Pixar movie. Whereas something like Sesame Street, even though it can be enjoyed by adults who like have like a good sense of humor and like aren't like, oh, this stuff is like for kids, this isn't blah blah. Even those people, it is still primarily, it's designed for children, first and foremost, right? And not just, we're talking young children. And it seems like Warner Brothers isn't as interested in that kind of content. So then I guess it raises the question, who could swoop up these rights, right? And anyone could swoop up these rights, but I think there's three groups. It's really two people or two groups, and then there's like the third group that includes a bunch of different companies. But they're all grouped together for the reason you'll see. So the first potential option would maybe be Disney, right? They already have the Muppets. The Disney company bought the core Muppet characters, so like the Kermit, Fozzie Bear, like that group of characters, back in 2004. Which itself was a delay, because back when Jim Henson was still alive, there were discussions for Disney to buy the Muppets, but unfortunately those kind of fell through before. By the time Jim Henson had passed away, it was too late. Like the negotiations weren't far along enough. So by the time that he passed away, it kind of just like faded into the background. But notably during those negotiations, Michael Eisner, the CEO of Disney, tried to buy the Sesame Street characters as part of it, which Jim Henson completely rejected because he was very much felt, because of the nature of those Sesame Street characters like Elmo, Bert and Ernie, Big Bird, and the educational purpose of Sesame Workshop, that, he's like, I've given them the merchandising rights for that, specifically so that they can keep funding this really important public service. So you're not buying them. They're not for sale. But maybe not so much that Disney will buy Sesame Street, but maybe Disney could then fill this gap of distributing it, right? The next group that could potentially buy it are one of these non-legacy media companies with streaming services. So like a Netflix or an Amazon with Prime Video or Apple with Apple TV Plus, right? The Hollywood Reporter notes that for any one of those companies, getting the rights to a legacy franchise like Sesame Street, with, again, such a large library, again, I think it's entering its 56th season, that's huge. That would be a huge, huge draw. And again, it would become for parents who have the expendable income, it would be an automatic bill that they would be willing to pay just to be able to have all of that content in one place. Because, of course, Max will still have the old library, but if you want everything, because I think Max doesn't even have the full old library. They started pulling off random seasons, I think the first couple seasons, just for money reasons, right? So that'd be really huge for one of those streaming services. But then the last group, and this is where I would like to see Sesame Street go, is PBS, right? Just keeping it on PBS. Again, like we were saying, licensing it out to a private company hurts the effectiveness. There is a value in it, because as part of that deal, Sesame Workshop gets money for that. So that can help the cash flow and can help keep the lights on and keep the operation going. Notably, the New York Times notes that the HBO partnership allowed them to make 35 episodes a year versus 18. So that's useful. It basically doubled the amount of episodes they were able to put out. So that's really great. But is that worth, again, locking it behind a paywall? And again, obviously America has changed, socioeconomic conditions have changed, education has changed, but what does it mean to block out the kids who theoretically need it most, the families that need it most? Again, that decision to partner with HBO got a lot of criticism, and I have a quote here from Tim Winter, who said in 2019, this is when he was the president of the Parents Television Council, saying, quote, HBO is holding hostage underprivileged families from having access to timely first-run episodes of perhaps the single most educational children's franchise in the history of electronic media, end quote. Which I agree with on principle, though I will say, Sesame Workshop, this was like a willing, if they're hostages, they were willing hostages. You could argue maybe they could make Sesame Street available for free on Max, but before every episode there would be a commercial for something, so it might be an opportunity to get people who do have the expendable income to be like, hey, maybe we should get Max. But again, for the families that can't afford it, you're kind of shit out of luck. You have to wait 9 months. So I think the best would be PBS and the American government, because a lot of people don't know this. PBS is not like this fully funded thing by the government. Most of it is through donations and like local partnerships and stuff. I think this is a really bold statement, but YouTube is all about big, bold, superlative statements. I think Sesame Street is the greatest public good in American history. Better than the post office, better than the highway, the interstate system. I think dollar for dollar, pound for pound, I think Sesame Street has made America has improved the lives of Americans more than any other thing that the government has invested in. Libraries, maybe libraries is an exception, but so I personally feel the government should step in here, which they never will do, but the government, in a nonpartisan sense, should step in and go, you know what, you shouldn't have to be pimping yourself out to an HBO or a Disney or a Netflix. This is a public good, and it has been a public good. It has done our country immeasurable service, and we need to keep it free for and available to everybody, regardless of their socioeconomic status. So we're gonna split. We're gonna fill the difference. We're gonna split the difference with you. That whatever you would have been getting with an HBO, we will invest. You just keep doing what you do best, and we'll flip the bill. Of course, that's not going to happen, right? Because there's always debates every couple of years. Some Republican goes, we need to defund PBS. So then all the liberal publications go, Mitt Romney wants to kill Big Bird or something crazy, right? Which is a gross simplification and kind of just distracts from the problem. So we can't even talk about the actual problem, let alone doing something about the problem. So that will probably never happen, but I'm sure we'll see someone swoop this up, because again, just the brand alone, again, Disney is probably drooling over the potential chance to get their hands on this. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. I think I may have run out of water. I'm gonna go quickly run. I'm gonna see how many people leave. I'm just getting some water. I'm sorry, viewers. I'm just so passionate tonight. I have so much to say. I drank all my water. I usually still have some left over by the end. Okay, let's talk about story number 5 here. So, a complete change from what we were talking about here. So let's talk about story number 5. Trigger warning, content warning for this. This is going to be a little difficult. We're going to be dealing with issues of sexual assault and rape and sexual violence and abuse. So if that's not something you can sit through, totally understand, go back and watch the rest of this video. You'll rewatch your favorite parts. Don't leave entirely, but this is gonna not be this is not gonna be such a fun thing to go through. So Sean Carter, aka Jay-Z, pictured here to my left, has been accused of raping a 13-year-old girl, along with Sean Diddy Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Diddy, right? This was a lawsuit originally filed back in October of last year. And originally it only listed Diddy as the defendant, and it named Celebrity A and Celebrity B as 2 other people involved in the incident. It was later amended recently to include Jay-Z by name, Sean Carter. And this was filed by an anonymous Jane Doe. Now, the question will be, will she stay anonymous, or will she have to come public legally? Because there's certain requirements of if an accuser can stay anonymous, and there's certain legal requirements that would have to be satisfied, and there's debate whether she fits those qualifications. But the claim basically boils down to Jay-Z and Diddy raping her in 2000. So this is almost 25 years ago. So the story is that she gets dropped off. I think she's from Rochester. She gets dropped off at Radio City Music Hall, where the MTV Video Music Awards were being held. She couldn't get in. She didn't have a ticket or anything. But there's a Jumbotron. She's just watching it outside. And eventually she encounters Diddy's limo driver, who told her that she, quote, fit what Diddy was looking for, end quote. Just to give you a sense of what kind of character Diddy is. So she agrees, okay, this is after party, so she goes. When she arrives, she's forced to sign an NDA. Interesting. Well, when she arrived. So she's at this party. She's given stuff to drink. Again, mind you, she's 13. This would all be bad if she was an adult. This is a 13-year-old girl. So she's talking to all these celebrities, whatever. She's drinking this stuff, and she starts to feel woozy. And the way she describes it, most likely she was drugged. She said it had a weird taste or a weird color in the drink. And as she started to talk about not feeling well, Combs and Carter come in proclaiming, quote, "You are ready to party," end quote. And she's first raped by Jay-Z. And she said in her complaint, quote, "Jay-Z comes over, holds me down. I start trying to push away. He puts his hand over my mouth, tells me to stop it, to cut the shit, and then he rapes me like he had me overpowered," end quote. When Jay-Z is done, she then is proceeded to be raped by Diddy. She eventually is able to kind of squirm out of the situation and kind of finds herself, kind of makes her way to like a local gas station, calls her father, who then picks her up. And she had stayed silent until now. With the whole kind of the floodgates being open on all this Diddy stuff. She recently, again, still under an anonymity, speaking to NBC, she said, quote, "Even if somebody found out, who was going to believe me? I mean, it was the word of two celebrities against mine," end quote. And again, even for adults, that's like the tale as old as time. That it's like people always go, "Why didn't they say anything? Like, why is it coming out now?" And it's like, well, what was she supposed to do? I mean, Diddy was not super, super popular that much anymore. But before all this stuff came out, he was still very wealthy and well-connected. And Jay-Z is very wealthy and still very connected and still very popular. If by nothing else, by being married to Beyonce, who's a huge star. In the lawsuit itself says, quote, "Another celebrity stood by and watched as Combs and Carter took turns assaulting the minor. Many others were present at the after party but did nothing to stop the assault. Combs has been allowed for years to conduct himself in this manner without any consequences. He believes he is above the law. He is not. His close friend, Sean Carter, has been with Combs during many such instances described herein," end quote. And the lawsuit really tries to highlight the close relationship between these two men. Collaborators, even more than collaborators, as friends. Saying, quote, "Indeed, the two are apparently so close that Combs stated in 2023 that Carter is the only person other than Combs' mother who is allowed to call him by his legal first name of Sean," end quote. That doesn't seem like a passing acquaintanceship. That is a close friend. I'm just gonna grab a quick drink here. Continuing here, Jay-Z obviously is vehemently denying these accusations. He claims that he was actually sent the evidence a couple weeks ago, and he claims that it was sent to him in order to blackmail him into just settling for some sum of money. And Jay-Z later then said publicly, quote, "You have made a terrible error in judgment thinking that all celebrities," he puts in quotes, "are the same. I'm not from your moral world. I'm a young man who made it out of the projects of Brooklyn. We don't play these types of games. We have very strict codes and honor. We protect children. You seem to exploit people for personal gain. Only your network of conspiracy theorists, fake physics, will believe the idiotic claims you have levied against me that, if not for the seriousness surrounding harm to kids, would be laughable," end quote. In response, the lawyer for the anonymous Jane Doe, Tony Busby, what a good lawyer name, Tony Busby. Tony Busby replied to Carter saying, quote, "Mr. Carter previously denied being the one who sued me and my firm. He filed his frivolous case under a pseudonym." Oh yeah, sidebar, like Carter tried to sue to keep all this under wraps. Let me continue the quote. "What he fails to say in his recent statement is my firm sent his lawyer a demand letter on behalf of an alleged victim, and that victim never demanded a penny from him," which would seem to undermine Jay-Z's claim that this is all for extortion, essentially. Continuing, "Instead, she only sought a confidential mediation. Since I sent the letter on her behalf, Mr. Carter has not only sued me, but he has tried to bully and harass me and this plaintiff. His conduct has had the opposite impact. She is emboldened. I'm very proud of her resolve," end quote. Because again, Carter filed a legal motion since, more recently to try to have the accuser's name revealed. And the motion said, quote, "Mr. Carter deserves to know the identity of the person who is effectively accusing him. In sensationalized, publicity hunting fashion of criminal conduct, demanding massive financial compensation and tarnishing a reputation earned over decades, end quote. Again, that's strange though, because unless Tony Busby is lying, which he could very well be, it seems like she wasn't asking for any specific amount of money up front. She just wanted to have some kind of confidential mediation and keep it under wraps. It would be confidential. So a little context about Jay-Z, right? So born Sean Carter in 1969, the same year as Sesame Street, and the same year as my mother was born. And he was a very prominent figure of East Coast hip hop in the 1990s. Again, not as big of a celebrity and star now, but he is still in the public eye due to the fact he's married to Beyonce, right? But he's still very successful in his own right and has had a bunch of hugely successful hit songs, including but not limited to songs like 99 Problems, Run This Town, Empire State of Mind, Holy Grail, and on and on and on. And of course, like I said, he's married to Beyonce. They collaborated starting back in 2003. Presumably they knew each other before that. And they married each other in 2008. He is currently, as of today, 2024, he's the wealthiest music artist in the world with a net worth of $2.5 billion with a B, $2.5 billion. Though it's not like he's been the squeaky clean figure that is suddenly now getting tarnished. The Guardian notes that he's faced scrutiny in the past for the nature of his relationships with younger women. Notably, Beyonce is much younger than him. And there's been questions about the timeline of some of the relationships that he's had with women, in terms of when did they start really dating? And it may have been when they were a little too young. So for example, she was born in 81. So he's 12 years older than her, which is fine. I mean, I know plenty of people who are in marriages that they're 12 years apart. But she's 43 and they married in 2008. So that's 16 years ago. She was 27. They started working together 5 years before that. So she was 22. They probably knew each other before that. So the question becomes this grown-ass man, he was 30 or something, hooking up with an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, essentially. But I guess the question that always comes down to stories like this, is this true or not? And admittedly, there have been some inconsistencies in the accuser's account. Nothing major, it's not like this huge detail was wrong or obviously misleading, but certain elements of her account have been questioned or disproven, right? So, for example, she says her father picked her up from that gas station. Her father has said he has no memory of this event. Though Busby kind of defends against this, saying, quote, the lawyer saying, quote, he was in no state to remember during that point in time due to personal issues he was having then. We were talking about a time frame more than 20 years ago, end quote. So I guess that's info from the accuser giving context, he wouldn't remember. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means he was in a bad place or if he was using substances. I have no idea what that means, but that's the argument for that. But then there's another inconsistency. She claims she spoke to musician Benji Madden at this after party, but NBC was able to confirm that he wasn't there. I think he was on tour or something. He wasn't anywhere. He couldn't have been at any party, supposedly. And she admitted, she was I may have mixed up some of the details, but the core of what happened is true. And frankly, I can't blame her for mixing up any details. Because let me just run through this. She was drugged and traumatically raped almost 25 years ago when she was 13. Most people have trouble, if I had a gun to your head and say, tell me what you were doing at 9 a.m. on December 5th, 2024. You might mix up a detail. We're not human beings. Our memories are not as reliable as we would like to think. We have the general sketch of what happened, but specific details might kind of come and go. So again, the fact that she was in a drugged state, something like rape, again, is very traumatic, and that can have an effect on obviously your psychology, but your memory. This was so long ago, and she was 13. So anyone reflexively being oh, see, she messed up this thing, she must be lying, it's just so insincere and disingenuous. So my gut instinct is to believe this story. I could be wrong, And I will be the first to say I was wrong. But I wouldn't even need to say I'm wrong, because I'm not saying it happened. I'm saying my instinct is that there's a good chance this maybe is true. Because in a lot of it is circumstantial. Again, the elements of his, some of the dubiousness of some of his past relationships with younger women, the fact he was so close to Diddy. How could he have been so close and not have known about what was going on, at the very least? And tying it all back to Diddy, which I've done a lot of videos now on this channel, this is just another casualty of this fallout from Diddy. And again, what Diddy represents, at first it just seemed like your average kind of Me Too moment of this person being accused of stuff, and it was probably true, and it turned out to be true about abuse, physical and sexual. But it's now turned into this almost Jeffrey Epstein labyrinthian web of, and I'm not laughing because it's funny. It would be funny if it wasn't so horrifying. This labyrinthian web of abuse and system, and these weren't random one-off secluded things. These were very much like, it was an open secret. And these abuses were so vile and so widespread, others had to have known about it, right? And the lawyers have alluded to as much, right? So again, anyone who was anywhere within the proximity of Diddy would have had to have known, to at least some extent, what was going on. And he was such a prolific producer of music. So we worked with so many different people. So the question will become, which of his collaborators may have known, been involved, or even taken part in some of these, indiscretions, which is really an understatement. So again, who else will be exposed? Like, for example, this lawsuit mentions, because the original lawsuit named Diddy, Celebrity A, and Celebrity B. We now know Celebrity A was Jay-Z. We still don't know who Celebrity B was. The lawsuit mentions it was a female celebrity, and she was present and watched the rape take place. Could it be Beyonce? Probably not. Again, because I don't know the timeline of Jay-Z and Beyonce and Diddy all, knowing each other. But again, it's not just a bunch of men. It's women. Powerful women are just as susceptible. I mean, of course, the Jeffrey Epstein thing. Ghislaine Maxwell, she was the one who really made all of the abuse happen systematically. So it's not just this idea of all these men are evil, us women need to. The women are just as capable of, at the very least, turning a blind eye to abuse. If it's in their own interest, right? So, again, this is really awful. My heart goes out to this accuser, and I hope that justice prevails, however that shakes out. Okay, that's the end of the show. Just want to give a few quick plugs. This isn't my only YouTube channel. I also have a sister channel called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film, media, entertainment in a more structured video essay format. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these cartoon versions of an older and a younger version of myself. It's a lot of fun. I really would appreciate you go checking that out. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Also want to give a plug to the podcast I mentioned earlier that I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This season we're doing Star Wars, which has been so much fun. We're just about to wrap up in the next 2 weeks. We have this Friday, then the Friday after that are our final episodes for the season. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us in the link down in the description below. And finally, I want to give a plug to Cinnamon Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter, where I write written reviews for new movies coming out. I've been doing it for almost 3 years now. I have over 100 reviews up. It would really mean a lot for you to go check those out. You can leave comments, tell me why you disagree with everything I said. You can find the link to that in the description below, or you can just go to your browser, type in cinnamonqso.substack.com. That's it for this week. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like this video. It really, really helps with the engagement and the algorithm, so more people can find the channel, and subscribe. So if you found the channel, subscribe. It really would be a huge help to me, and would really give me the courage and the stamina and the resolve to keep going. So thank you all for watching. Until next time, peace out.